Welcome to this podcast for Brighton School of Business and Management students studying for the HNC and HND courses. Section 1. Here you need to focus on sources of finance and discuss internal sources, which could include revenue and sales income or selling off assets, and external sources, which could include loans from banks, development grants, for example from the European Union, selling shares in the company, and in the case of a public sector organisation, allocated budget from government and the collection of local taxes. On the second bullet point, you need to consider that there are likely to be positive and negative implications for each of the examples you have included under bullet point 1. For example, if assets are being sold, then the overall value of the organisation is diminished, and if loans are arranged, then repayments must be made, and with certain sources of finance, the lender will demand some influence over the organisation's decisions. For the third bullet point, select a project that is typical to your own organisation or sector, or perhaps select a project which interests you. Then identify and discuss the merits of different sources of funds which are appropriate for that project. Section 2. You will need to research the costs of each of the sources of finance you have identified, but as a guide there will be financial costs applicable to some of the sources, which is mainly interest added to the amount borrowed, and also the constraints of payback timescales, which you could perhaps describe as a pressure cost. And on other sources of finance the cost will be loss of control, as would be the case with some loans, grants and share issues. Bullet point 2. In essence, without financial planning there is no way of being certain that an organisation can fund its own activities. You will need to give more detail on how this financial planning is undertaken. Bullet point 3. In the context of managing finance, you need to identify the decision makers inside an organisation, which could include managers and specialists operating at different levels, and external decision makers such as shareholders, funding organisations and the government, and discuss the differences in the amount and quality of financial and accounting information that they are likely to need. And on the last bullet point, you need to describe how the influx of funds, which could be loans, grants, share issue income, retained profits and so on, how this can influence the appearance of the profit and loss account and also the appearance of the balance sheet. You should also briefly mention how and why organisations need to be transparent about this type of information. Section 3. You will need to analyse a budget period of at least 6 months and comment on the performance and the behaviour over that period and give your views on what action should have or could have been taken. Unit costs are calculated in a similar way in most business sectors as are pricing decisions. You will need to give the formula and explain the link between unit cost and selling price, and the importance of information on fixed costs, variable costs and break-even point. Bullet point 3. From the finance point of view, projects need to be assessed for viability to ensure that the project is properly funded and that it will be profitable. You need to briefly describe techniques such as NPV, DFC, rate of return and IRR, and give a simple example of one of these techniques being used. The finance and grants pages at www.businesslink.gov.uk are an excellent source of information for this section. And finally, section 4. The main financial statements are the annual accounts, the profit and loss account, in some sectors known as the operating statement or statement of income and expenditure, and the balance sheet. You need to explain what they contain, their purpose and importance, and who makes use of them. On bullet point 2, you need to describe and compare the formats, that is the structure, content and detail of the main statements for different businesses. For example, self-employed, partnership, limited company, public limited company, charity, perhaps a local authority and a state-owned organisation. On the last bullet point, you would need to analyse at least 3 consecutive years of a profit and loss account and balance sheet or equivalents of your own organisation or an organisation that you can research. British Airways can be used here, or you could use a different organisation but only with your tutor's approval. you need to identify a range of ratios and trends and then comment on them. For example, comparison ratios such as gross profit to sales of 1.25 to 1, net profit to sales 0.25 to 1. Trend ratios such as the ratio of net profit to sales, each over a series of years, and 3 years is universally accepted as the minimum needed to identify a trend. You also need to look at internal ratios, which are literally that, ratios comparing figures related to your organisation's own accounts, and external ratios, which are either comparisons between your chosen organisation and a different one, for example British Airways compared with Virgin Air, or comparisons with industry standards. Most industries have standard ratios which are considered to be safe ones to aim for or to achieve. For a good example of financial statement ratios, you could go to www.iagshares.com and have a look at the economic and financial information pages. And finally, here is a list of websites you should find useful when completing this assignment. If you need any further information or guidance with this assignment, please contact your tutor.